And I will share. Good. I can share the entire screen. There are no secrets. If there are secrets, it's not my fault. Probably I can do. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Everybody, and today we'll talk about resilient apps with Angular 2. I'm an engineering lead in McGraw-Hill Education, and you want me to use it?
You can keep talking.
You can hear me, right? Cool. Okay. I'm a community fellow since 2004. It's my time in the community is doing free talks and working on open source projects, contributing on what I can. Pretty related to mobile technologies. So I spend 50% of my time on mobile and 50% on front end. So I speak 3 languages: Swift, JavaScript, and Java. But my favorite is still JavaScript. Under Mobile T. What is Mobile T? Mobile T is not just the logo that I have hoodie, but it's a meetup, a friendly one. We do music, good food, and technical talks. So from the others, not saying that it's better, but if you are really a social guy, you want to talk, make a lot of noise and get drunk, it's the place. It's supported by McGraw-Hill Education and by Twitter. So I always say thanks to these 2 guys. But let's talk about Angular. So using actively Angular 2. So the first part will be a little bit something that you know already. Let everybody else. Offline status and how much is important to handle properly the offline status of your application, and the Service Worker API. Service Worker API, obviously Safari, that is the new Internet Explorer, is not supporting that, but we can survive. How to work with the Service Worker with Angular 2. So we'll use the type definition of TypeScript to install the DataType, and we'll play with them. And we'll see how Redux come into place with Angular 2 and with Service Workers. And even more, we'll focus our attention on how much Redux can help us to improve the offline experience of our applications. Angular 2. So the tech stack of Angular 2, it's pretty standard. We have TypeScript, RxJS, we have JSPM or Webpack. It depends on preferences. I was in love with JSPM, but then the simplicity of Webpack brought me to use Webpack more than JSPM. NPM, Grant, or Babel, or Gulp, sorry, to handle our tasks. Why there are these question marks close to Gulp? At the end of the day, everybody is migrating to NPM to automate everything, and we can use a single tool to rule them all. Testing. How many of you do test-driven development? Good, thanks. Test first or die. Was a good meetup that we did. But the point is that you can use Karma and Jasmine or Mocha plus Chai with Angular 2. Honestly, the easiest configuration is Karma, Jasmine, and Chai. Mocha is a little bit tricky, but how many of you are in love with TypeScript? How many of you knows Flow? Okay. How many of you knows the difference between TypeScript and Flow? Flow, it's the purpose of Flow is kind of the same. It's adding strictly typed JavaScript. The point is that it's something that make an analysis of your code and check if you assign a string to a variable, then you cannot assign a number in a second during the lifetime of this variable. TypeScript, it's a superset of JavaScript on the other side. and implement classes, interface, inheritance, private properties, and methods. But properties are not really private. Just to let you know, it's syntax sure. Plus, all these nice object-oriented constructs on top of your code can bring you to unexpected results sometimes and increase too much the complexity of your code. But that's the choice of the Angular team. Also, if behind the scene, a lot of Angular is built on top of Dart. How many of you think that Dart is dead? Okay, but I was surprised when I saw how much of Angular components, of Angular core, it's built on top of Dart and transpiled to JavaScript. RxJS. RxJS, it's a reactive extension, reporting of the reactive extension paradigm to JavaScript. Rx is available for Swift, for Java, for PHP. Basically, you start programming, treating your objects and your data as streaming of data. And that's very powerful. RxJS, it's at the core of Angular 2, and even more, will be a standard in the upcoming versions of ECMAScript. Be ready to develop the reactive programming paradigm. The most important thing is that combines observable and operators, and you can subscribe to the stream of data and react accordingly, especially if the stream of data, and I will show you exactly what I'm referring to, because preparing the demo, I found a small detail that is not mentioned anywhere that hours to be developed. It's super simple. You can create an observable, and you can see that every 1,000 milliseconds, you want for 3 times having something that happens. And then you get 2 in the console log. It seems a little bit too simple, right? True, it's not so simple. There are a lot of operators, there are a lot of things to know about RxJS. It's impossible to start with RxJS in 30 minutes. Or if there is a crash course in 2 hours, no. It's a different way of programming, so you have to start to think differently. It's super useful, especially when mixed with Angular, because every time that you use you can build a service on top of Observable. You use an HTTP request, you can return rather than a promise an Observable. Advantages of using Observable. Angular components, in a nutshell, we have selectors, template, and a class that controls this component. Selector is the HTML tag that you will use, while template, it's the HTML that you want to inject. You can use an align template, starting with this origin, HTML file, and take property of the component, the path to the file. When you define the class of your component, you can access whatever you have in the template, and the template can access to every property of your component. So yeah, and template. Input and output are decorators that help you to define the data that have to go into your component and the data that you want to emit from your component. Input, it's a monodirectional data binding from the top to the bottom of your component. Think about Angular 2 as a tree of components. That's one of the reasons why it's faster. When we were working with Angular 1.x, behind the scene, rather than using a tree, Angular is using cycle. So everything was a reference, and you were not able to understand, and neither the engine were able to understand which was the node that needed an update, and so on. Input, it's part of this paradigm where everything comes from the top to the bottom of your component. Output is how you set up your events, how you emit your data from a child component to a parent component. You have several ways to hack into the component. You can play with the constructor, or you can use ngOnlnit. The difference is pretty important. Constructor is the default method that is executed by the class. So whenever the class is created the first time, this constructor it's invocated. It happens every time that the component is ready to go. So it means that the child view gets at least instantiated. Then there is another important LifeCycle hook that is the view init. And then this happens when the view are rendered and completely initialized. The component life cycles, it's pretty. We have eight main hooks. ngOn changes, on init to check. The most important one are the init to check that happens every time that a change detection cycle happened. And the after view init, it's pretty interesting because if you have a child component that needs to do something or you want to access the method of the component, you have to wait that the component is completely initialized. Templates, you can use bindings, main bindings right now. The interpolation, it's the double curly brace, whatever variable, whatever property you put into this double curly brace will be translated to a string. So you can populate your template with whatever thing. The pipe operator allows you to combine some properties like title with some directives like uppercase that title completely uppercase. And the net binding happens with parentheses. Last but not least important, the two-way binding that makes Angular 1 so popular is implemented with square and parentheses. Well, it's full of online tutorials. Have you tried any tutorial about Angular? Oh no, yeah. Okay. So why? Because Angular is out of the beta officially since 1 month and a half. And this means a lot. It doesn't mean that they made 1 month. It's 2 years that is under development. And there are tutorials that use alpha or beta 1 that are completely broken in the next build. That is why it's important into the documentation. And the best documentation is the source code of Angular. If you go on github.com/Angular and then you go into the Angular repository, you can find everything. The documentation of Angular, it's inside the code. The reason why the Studio Code tool works better than others right now, and I'm not a big fan of it, it's because it's able to read entirely the documentation from the source code. So if you go into the source code, if you go on the Angular repository, you get the fresh, updated documentation because it's what they shipped. Better than the online tutorials. Questions so far?
Good tutorials have you found for Angular 2?
Okay, the question is, which are the good tutorials that I found for Angular 2? Victor Savin, one of the main engineers that work on Angular, is writing continuously. That's one of the best sources. Medium, it's a very interesting source of Angular 2 tutorials. Wrangle.io, they're also pretty helpful with a lot of tutorial and a lot of guides. And at the end of the slides, and the slides are already online. Other questions? Cool. A resilient app, it's an app that treats offline as the norm. Just have a fallback. So basically, you never show a blank that doesn't do anything. And a resilient app use the available browser API to detect the network capabilities and the status of the app itself. logic change accordingly to the online status. This is, in a nutshell, what a resilient app is. You know this website or mobile websites. So Facebook, I think everybody has an account on Facebook, right? Fine, maybe someone gets someone on Pocket TypeScript stuff. They treat the offline not in a very good way. Not all of them. So no internet connection worrying, and we get some data. And it's okay to me. The app is changing, it's handling the offline as something that can really help. Here I got the set face. What the hell is it? On Pocket, okay, I get this big alert. I think that my phone is dying, but it's a little bit too strong, but at least I can understand. Offline is a good. You can design a better app. You can review the design of your old app, because to support service worker, to support all this new technology, you can touch old code and improve your code. Don't tell me that you cannot improve your old code. I don't believe it. Okay? Also, in the worst code base ever that I touched in the past 15 years, and there is a guy that knows this code base over there, I found a space and some space for improvement. Treat offline as an opportunity to go back and fix the way you were handling the offline status, or you were not. Identify your app assets and your app layers. The network layer, you have bundles, you have user interface. All these elements of a web app can be treated differently. Is that service worker? Application layer, you can components as much as possible so that if the offline is preventing something to work, this something will be small enough to don't destroy completely the user experience. The network layer, you have the fetch API since enough. And you can use promises. Well, why through the fetch API you don't cache whatever you want in the service worker? You can cache also the bundles. You can save in the local cache of your browser, in the application cache of your app, bundles, JavaScript, CSS, images, so you can render something other than the set face. And the user interface, don't deliver the same images to everyone. So right now, having a mobile phone option, it's absolutely something usual, happen every day. You don't need very huge image to be delivered on a mobile phone. Start to think about how you want to content and deliver the appropriate content for the right screen size. But it's absolutely. You want more details? Cool. Let's talk about the service worker API. Driven worker that act like a proxy, so you can catch every request on the network service worker and react accordingly to it. The service worker is not UI blocking. Whatever you delegate, it's happening in a separate thread. So your UI stays as fluent as you want. It's not a web worker, but it's the same concept. So you use the service worker in order to handle network requests, workers in order to process data and make. It's pretty simple. You have that happens only once when you install your service worker into your app. And an activate event that can return an error, eventually, and you can handle the error. So for some error, permissions, whatever, something wrong is happening, you can handle. Your wonderful service worker stays in idle and wait to fetch, to handle a message, to do whatever. And you can use it to handle push notification to synchronize in background huge case. And you can handle, as the last thing, the terminated event. Maybe it's the right time to clear all the cache. Register a service worker. You check if the service worker property exists in the navigator object, and if it exists, the method of the service worker API pointing to the JavaScript file that is your service worker. It's a return a promise, so it's easy. Access and say, oh yeah, I have installed it. Or you can handle the error and eventually change your application state or your component state for the user that something went wrong. The installation, and here we are in the service worker file, so we are out of our application. You set up an event listener for the install event. And once you have done this, you wait until what? Until your cache open, array on which you can check if the cache exists. You can add all the files that you want. It's very important that you can also skip the waiting time and perform what is known as a not blocking installation. So rather than having the service worker waiting for the cache to be initialized and pre-populated, you can skip and you can say, hey, self skip waiting. This self is working itself. It's the service worker file. Miss this part. When you store something in your cache, it stays in your cache for a while. This while depends on several things. One, if you are exceeding the quota of your cache. Another possible reason why to stay forever or almost forever is if you start to save everything in the same cache, if you don't version your cache. Or the user can clear the cache of the browser, but it's not something that happens so often. And so you have to be predictable, and you have to start to keep your cache version with a variable if your service worker, or at least the file that gets included in your service worker in order to invalidate the cache. The import script points to another file that is on your bundle or on your that contains just this variable. This is synchronous, so you cannot get here if this is not completed. So don't store too many things. But the point is, having the variable, having the version of your cache in a variable can save your life. And to me, it's today, preparing the demo, an error from the cache, and I simply change the cache version from 0.8 to 0.9, and I identified the error, and I saw what was going wrong in my cache.
So would you be caching data as well?
Oh, yes.
And what would be the reason to cache it there versus like storage?
Well, one of the thing is that caching this data into the cache, you can get every fetch request that is happening from the HTTP module of Angular 2 and access directly the cache, returning the data. With local storage, you have to check that it's offline, and then eventually you have to ask the local storage, actually are in the same format or not, but usually not because it's a key value data structure, and then you have to translate back the data and give the data.
So you're managing
it. With the fetch API and with the cache exposed by the service worker, if you are offline, you will not recognize it. Be able to recognize it. Obviously, if it's asking data that are not in cache, yes. But if the data are in cache, it's a straightforward operation. It's completely transparent.
If you're versioning, so that means that the old versions are still sticking around.
To clean your cache. And I will show you how to do it in the next slide. The next slide. Let's go. These are, it's obviously, it's just an example. Let's simplify things. And here I'm deleting all the cache every time my service worker is activated. Okay, so I'm not supposing to keep a previous version of the data. The app is starting, and then if the app goes offline, I handle the previous request. It's pretty simple. You access the cache, and when you get to the key list that you have in the cache, you go through all of them with the promise.all and with the map function, map method of the arrays, and you remove everything. When you fetch the request, and that's the main difference with the local storage, you are really in this event listener every single HTTP request that is performed by your app. So without any extra logic, without any extra catch the request, and you decide to respond with resource or with the offline resource accordingly to the status of the app.
Do you have to use the fetch API in order to use that functionality?
You have to use the fetch API. No, you have to use the fetch API. The good news is that the HTTP module of Angular 2 uses the fetch API. So it's transparent for Angular user, for React user, and so on. But you need the fetch API. There are other questions? Sure.
Could you just repeat that last part before you answer the question? You mentioned something about without having to do any extra steps. I just didn't catch that last part.
Sure. The question is about the extra step that I was mentioning that are not needed with service worker. If you want to use local storage, for instance, to cache some data and offering something to the user, you have to catch these data that usually are in a key value pair. This data, so if it's a string, you have to parse the string as a JSON object to add extra logic. And there is this is an example. So here, I'm accessing the local storage. What I'm doing here, I'm checking, first of all, if the data in my local storage exists. Returning something. I'm checking if the property last searched exists in the data that I have in the local storage. And eventually, I return this and I show this in the user interface. When I'm dealing with service workers, I don't have to do this. If I open my service worker file, here we go. When responds to with a fallback on cache, I simply the network response or the cache response. So it's not an extra layer. There is some logic, yes, because I have to decide if I want to return the cache response. But I don't have to parse again this data. Whatever response it is, if it's an image, I will get an image. If it's an object, I will get an JSON object. If it's whatever, binary file, I can get also the binary file. It's in my original request that it's cloned here and it's cached. It's returned to me without any additional layer, additional logic. Does it answer your question? You're welcome. Here we go. Important thing for the guys that do test-driven development, a service worker doesn't need any extra testing. The point of a service worker is handling the cache and returning data if there are activity. whatever method your component is implementing to use this data will work in the same way if there is offline or online status. So you don't have to think, okay, but to use this API, I have to double the effort of writing my test cases. Pieces of your client-side code stay the same. You can have some end-to-end test executed with 2 different status, and you can check the behavior of your line of your application when it's offline. The result that you get are the cached one, are exactly the same. There's no need to add additional testing. Security. During the development, you can use a service worker through the local host. No extra work for you. But to deploy on a site, when you're really planning to go online, you need HTTPS, and it makes sense. This is something more. You can handle through the service worker push notification. So if you want to receive notification and handle queue, the push notification, and handle all the queue of push notification when you are offline, you can. You can also understand if the user is clicking on the notification and can eventually do something. Sync. Open and synchronize that offline database and store this database offline. Well, that's a good point. Service worker can be debugged through the Chrome internals, sitting from :// service worker internals, and you get access to all the service workers that you have installed, and you can unregister, start to debug, or you can use the developer tools. So in the developer tools, there is the application tab. It appeared maybe in May, right? It was out with the official Chrome in May. And you can click on the service worker file and use all the standard tools. You can have breakpoints, you can inspect variables, you can understand what's going on, you can access to the caches, and so on. Here, all the caches are named cache static B0.8. That are B0.9. That's because I solved the bug and I changed the cache version. Demo. Let's start with the first demo. Now the point is, if I go offline, but okay. So no. There is a trick. We'll not stop the broadcast. So this is not a demo that I built. It's a demo that is available on MDN. And right now I am online. I'm refreshing. I'm getting this wonderful image from Star Wars and from but that's fine. If I go on the application and I click offline, cross the fingers. Shit. What's happening? We are supposed to get everything back. Storage. Huh? Oh yeah, that's the reason why. It's better than fixing a demo live. I have to go one level up, and I have to serve again. Now, if we access here, you see that in the service worker 3, all with errors, register all of them. Yeah, we have one that seems activated and running. Okay, now we try again to put the application offline. We refresh and we got all the data. So I'm offline and I'm getting from the cache content, whatever you see in the browser. The reason why it was not working, it's because of the path of the service worker that by the demo that I haven't touched should be in the sw-test folder. If you want to debug, you can access it pretty simply. And that's what it's doing. It's caching the HTML, the CSS, JavaScript, and all the images. So there's no possibility that this application, or at least this web page, will show you the unwanted, offline, terrible, Chrome web page. Let me put it again online. Questions about the first demo? You want to see more code? Just ask. So, all this code. Here, we are not using TypeScript, so there is no data typing. We search with the in operator for the property exists in the navigator object, and if it exists, please install the service worker. With this object, we can pass additional properties to the registration method. We can say which is the scope. Scope is nothing more than the path in which you want to install your service worker. And that was the reason why of the missing demo. You get several console log messages, and in the service worker, this is pretty simple. We open a cache that is named D1, and inside this cache, we store all this information. If we go here, now the cache storage, it's populated, and we have the file name, the response. So everything is okay. We have 8 items in the cache. Everything is happening offline. Let's move forward. So, Angular. To install the DataType. Why? Well, we can use Angular 2 also without TypeScript, but to me, make not too much sense. It's a development paradigm that it's okay, help me to prevent mistakes, it's standard. So we can use npm and install a new type. Angular 2 and TypeScript 2, the installation of new data type was happening through typings. Typings is an npm module that is going to be deprecated and was used to install additional data types inside types. Now you can use npm. The important thing is that you use the @ sign, types, and then the name of the data type that you want to install.
NPM3.
Sorry?
Does that only work with NPM3?
Yes, absolutely. Using npm3.
I'm writing lambdas.
Okay. To start with the service worker, you have to think a little bit to your services. I can use callback, promises, observable. We go every time with promises and with observable. All these services are compatible with the use the fetch API and are compatible with service worker. The thing between promises and observable. The difference between promises and observable. No, you know. But
Observables are a continuous stream of data, and promises are just one time. Okay, we're done, and then move on.
you know that are cancelable, the observables. Are cancellables. You can cancel.
Oh yeah, you can cancel.
You can cancel, and you can cancel also the ongoing request and stream of data. And the last thing that is very important to me, you can retry observable. You can retry observable. And this is more exciting than a promise, because a promise, you can handle that. You cannot say, hey, I want to retry. to get this data because I know that probably the error that is happening, it's due to something that I know.
I say that is that observables are lazy until you subscribe, well, promises are eager. Like as soon as
That's a good point to add. Yeah, are lazy. They use less resources. Service worker API, please don't debug your service worker in a standard browser window. Open an anonymous one. Because otherwise, your browser will start to be polluted by your service worker that at the beginning will be full of bugs. You can close and forget about all your mistakes. And then never create a monolithic service. There is the import script that allow you to import different packages or different files. So keep your code organized. Don't start to do the Wild West JavaScript development that was happening before modules with monolithic files that make no sense to anybody. And keep your service in your app root. Avoid the problem of the scope that I show to you right now in the other demo. Make absolutely sense, because if you want to cache CSS, image, static files, you can specify your path from the root. It's much more easy. Powerful, right? You like the cat? Take a look again. It's very powerful. So, Redux. How many of you are using Redux? How many of you know? Okay, so this part is interesting. Redux, it's the definition that you can find on the web. It's a predictable state container for JavaScript applications. First time that you read it, you say, okay, what the hell is that? So let's start with some background. Every application should have a state where your model lives and say, hey, I'm doing this, I'm fetching this data, I'm manipulating this data. The app right now it's offline or it's online, or there are that are connected. This is the application state. Poorly bring to the Web 2.0 application, where JavaScript were not supporting us in any way with any object-oriented paradigm, and we were just putting everything with jQuery in wonderful files, and every single widget was handling separately part of the state, duplicating data, and so on. Your app can be also a small widget. Data that your app have to handle. And imagine that this data can be changed by only by a single source of change. If you think about it, it's a dream. A way to keep your code clean and to be able to debug properly. There is only a single place. Your application state is changed. You can catch a bug in seconds, in minutes. That's Redux. Redux helps you to mix together a predictable state because you use actions to change your state. So you have events that get propagated through your app, a single place, and this single place change what you have as a model. You can use the reducers to manipulate the state, and every time that you get an action, you get some data attached to this action, and you can decide what to do with this data. Everything happening in a reducer. A reducer is a magic word to say it's a function that returns something. So if you remove some of the terminology that is part of the definition, state container is just an object that contains the model of your application. Actions are just events, and everybody that is doing JavaScript since a couple of years knows what are events. It's a function that returns something. Potentially, it's a pure function if you want to add some complexity. State is this object that describes what your app is doing, or the data that your app is handling. Use a single object to store your model, to store your app state. You will see that as soon as it starts to grow too much, there is something wrong. The publication of data, maybe the state, it's not really describing what the app is doing, but it is just a clone of your server-side API. Don't do this mistake. If you think that the state of your app is the exact copy of your server-side API, that's absolutely wrong. The server-side API provides you the data. App itself is handling a user experience, a user flow that manipulates and works with this data. Memoize. Use memoization as much as you can in your reducers to avoid to manipulate multiple times the application state. Have a more efficient application state. Use the local storage. It's not bad. There are things that you want to store in the cache that are usually data, images, assets, other files, and there are information like the last search that gets performed on a search form that you can store in the local storage. To the state of the app. Redux. We say that Redux has this single object that handles the application state. Well, Redux gives you also an interesting, let's say, plugin, Redux local storage, allow you with these 3 lines of code, just because the screen is too small. It's a single line of code, if you think about it. This field of my application state into this key local storage. Automatically, that your application state, that the last search property of your application state is updated automatically for you. And yes, we need Redux to do all of these things, to keep the state consistent, to access local storage easily, and it's nice. Redux has a learning curve that is not terrible, may take 1 day, and not to know everything, but to set up your first application, start to enjoy the actions, set up the developer tools, and explore your application state, understanding what are these reducers. 8 hours is long. And bring your application to a level of freedom that is unbelievable. Everything in your application will happen through an action. So it's not anymore that when the user clicks on the button, then a chain of infinite methods is executed. Maybe also that you have an infinite chain of methods, but at the end of the day, execution of all this code is an action. This action is going to update the application state. You update the application state and Angular and Redux together, completely the of components that are in your application. Even more, Redux work with the detection change mechanism of Angular 2, so you will not update the entire tree, but only that bring you from the root of your app to the specific component that needs to be updated and it's connected to the state. Reducers. Reducers are functions that handle the state, that get the input from the action and update the state. This is an example of a reducer. Then a function that returns something. The something is determined according to the app that you're working on. For instance, this is the to-do app that you find on the Redux website. It's returning to me when I add the to-do. So when in the case that we have an action that is add to-do, it returns a new object. This new object is set, it's an array of to which the last to-do get concatenated. The stores again, and these together, put together, actions are the glue for actions and for the application state. You use a store to dispatch a new action, but you also use the store to access your application state. When you do store get state from wherever you are in your app, access to this single object and holding for you the application state. So you don't have any more that are in the state of the app, that they are connected to another object and so on. You have a single object, and this object is accessible everywhere, plus type to any change of this object. So you can have completely decoupled component. If you unplug a component, the state will not rely on it, and other components are not relying on it. There is not anymore a tightly coupling between the two. You dispatch an action, the store called the reducer that you assign it to this action, and the root reducer combine the output into a single output. State is saved in the store, to the store, and the changes are propagated. Come on. But also confusing. Readable enough? So let's take a look first to what this app is doing. Yeah. So let's put this app online. Let's search for Lady Gaga using the Spotify API to search some music. I put Lady. Okay, sorry. Now? It's not the projector. You see it now? Kinda. Well, trust me, it's Lady Gaga. It's the only USA singer that I know. No, kidding you. But the point is, okay, I'm using some API, the Spotify API, and you can add and remove from favorites whatever artist you want. So you see that here, this is changing. And this can happen online or offline. If I go offline and I get again an error, okay. Flow, okay. We are here, and we go again. And now there is something terrible going on in my the beauty is that I can open whenever I want window and start over. Let's see if it's true. It's true, kind of. Okay. And now we search for a different guy. We get some results. In the application, on the service worker, I don't have anymore the 78 errors that were happening. I tried to put again offline, and I will kill someone. And why are you doing this to me? You're the best buddy. Let's add register. Let's start over. Now it's registered. We have, that's my fault. But if I go offline now, well, I will fix the demo. I'll show you the code. Let's start with the interesting part about yeah. Let me fix it. I want to show you the demo, otherwise make no sense. Okay. Application and register. Okay. Still giving me an error. Okay, sorry. Let's talk about, let's focus our attention on Redux and what I was trying to show you. So, first of all, the app is split in several components, and everything, the magic, is happening in the. There are several imports. You import the application state, you import the DevTool extensions, and ngRedux. What is ngRedux? ngRedux is a wrapper for Angular 2 that is using inside Redux. It's simply angularizing Redux. Once you angularize Redux, you can access to a set of methods. One of the most important is that you have to, the one that you have to use to configure the store. To configure the store, you need a reducer, you need the default application state, and eventually you need the logger. What is this logger? It's the guy that is showing me in the console these informations. I have an action that is nothing more than that, and I have the previous state and the next state of my application. In the previous state, in the favorites, I have an empty array. In the next state, I have an array with an ID and with a name. To get a better understanding of this application state, you can use the developer tools that Redux bring to you. Here you have an history of every single action that is happening inside your, and to the difference, and this is the difference between the initial state and the next state of your application, to the action that get performed, the init, here you have the add favorite item, and you can also test. You can generate your test. You can simply and easily copy and paste this code and check your Redux integration and implementation is working. Another interesting thing that you can do is that you can say add favorite item, and this is the type of action. You can dispatch it. Here you are getting all the objects. So we have the initial state, we have a new state, and here we have a state that is equal. Let's take a look to our first reducer, that is the reducer. The favorite reducer, it's action is getting. It is checking if it's getting the add item or the remove item. The add item. It's returning a new array that is made up by the old state plus the item that is sent through our action. We're not sending any action, any item here. We're simply saying, hey, the type is add favorite item, so the state is not getting changed. Here, and we say item, and it's an object, and we dispatch it again, that now the states.
Does it matter that the E is missing?
What is missing?
Add favorite.
That's its missing. That's its matter. Thank you. Good catch. Now the states are not anymore equal, and there is a new that is part of the state. So the connection is this one. You have an application state. The application state, plain JavaScript object in which you can specify that you have an history that is an array of search items, in this case, an array of track, and the last search. Create your glue between your application state and the reducer. Anything else to do than saying that you want to combine your reducers. When you combine your reducers, what you're actually doing is saying, hey, property of my application state will be handled by this reducer. The favorites by this, the last search by this reducer. In the previous version of Redux, if you were using history and here history reducer, your store were not updated. The requirement was an exact match between the store, the reducer name and the property. Now it's not anymore a bug, but if you wanted to mention, you import the reducer and you create an alias for the reducer, and that's it. You have combined the reducers, because when you create your store with the middleware, the function that comes from Redux, all the you want to combine. So the store is using some logging. If we remove this, we want to change something here. Change the logger. We stop to do. We'll see that when the app is loading again, our logs history that now it's an array with test, with a string test. Happening here, it's allowing you to combine reducers and loggers all together as a middleware. The middleware, it's something that is in the middle between the dispatch of the action and the reducer that receives the actions. You can add whatever layer you want, formatting layer, logging layer. Once you have done this, reducer, it's ready to use. Pass to it the default state and the dev tools. So the default state is because you want to start with an empty state that is defined with empty arrays and empty string. The default state, it's nothing more than another module that exports an upstate object that is that contains an empty array for the history, an empty array for the favorites, and an empty string for the last search element. You can use the paradigm. The paradigm is pretty simple. You start to keep all your actions organized. this is the add and remove an item from the fabric. So in this way, you can inject these dependencies in any Angular component. Variables that allow you to access pretty easily to this property rather than typing the string and do the mistake that they did. That dependency in Redux, you dispatch an action with an item. You dispatch another action with an ID. Part of the favorite action class. So these are public methods. So when you want to use, when you want to add or remove favorite list, you open the add to favorite components, and looking at the code, you see that you simply call the method add item, and to remove, you call the remove one. Started actually from the constructor, what you need. So to get access to the power of Redux, you import the action. The actions are defined as an injectable, and is injectable as the methods that contain the logic of dispatching something. Change for any reason actions, you don't have to change the code of the component and the logic of the component. Eventually, you play with actions. Eventually, you play just with this file without changing any logic. Why I'm saying this? Because this is a pretty standard way to use Redux with Angular, but you can use also different factors for your actions. There are another couple of libraries that are more similar to what React is using. Last attempt. I don't see a single good reason why. In fact, now it's working. Don't ask why. Two things, three suggestions. Return always a new object. Also, if you're not using immutable JS for immutability of the state, subscribers don't react. It's not a new, fresh one. Everything seems collapsing, reboot your Mac. Rico, can you speak about it? It happened today when I was working on the demo, and it simply crashed, and then everything started to work again. Like now, with the compilation, crashing because you saw that I changed the sum. And now the offline status is working. Let's say that are stable beta versions, not really stable versions. But you can see now that being offline, all my, I have here response, the search that I did, images that are stored for Bob Marley. So quickly recap what you have to care of. You need, as much as possible, organize the store. The store, it's this magic that is keeping connected together in your reducer. Okay? Usually, it's a good habit to have in the store the reducers and the initial states. Something that is important. You want your app to have a state that is not undefined, but is defined. Files, in this case, because contains simply place, but it's very important to have these things in place. Second part that is important to keep track are the actions. Are wrapper that you create the dispatch method and Redux. This is an angularized version. Dispatching the event, and the event is defined as an object with a string with a payload that you can name and call in whatever way you want. It can be item, it can be payload, it can be. And this is a wrapper that allows you, through the injectable decorator, to as services. In fact, look to the initialization of your app, and specifically to the app module, you have got the actions imported here and then are injected as providers. Your service and your actions that are treated the same way. You can unplug and change with whatever construction engine you want. There are interesting resources and are all here. The slides are already online. I will tweet immediately after the event. And already has the link for the entire repository and the entire demo. I need to take notes right now. And potentially answers.
With Redux, to access the entire store.
Sure. The question is how a component can access to the entire store. Absolutely. So if we open again here the component that I created to add to the favorites, the items, where it is. I used an interesting feature of ngRedux. With @select, the name of the property that is in the application state immediately a reference to this object. The reference that you get is an observable that contains an array, in this case. So from here, you can simply subscribe and you will get of your properties. Every time that your state changes, this subscriber will be executed. So to get access to the state, use whatever technique you want, but basically you inject the state and you subscribe. So your question?
You subscribe to whatever part of the state you're interested in.
Yes, exactly. With the select, you can specify whatever you want of the state. Last search. And the subscription, the subscriber, every time that the application state, this property of application state change.
The last time I looked at Redux, there was more than one implementation. Is NG Redux, call it conventional? I mean, the way to go.
It helps you a lot because you avoid some configuration complexities that you need with Redux without ngRedux. So if you are in the Angular world, I strongly recommend to use ngRedux. If you are working on an app that doesn't use Angular 2, use a plain version of Redux and configure your app.
Well, but there is a different, so like ngRedux is more closely aligned to the original Redux library, but there is another library that's really popular, ngRx.
ngRx, yes.
So that's like, it's more in the spirit of Redux, but it's much more reactive view.
In fact, yes, it's a good point, excellent point.
So now.
But then, yeah, well, but in fact,
Because it's commitment. You don't want to go back for 2 3 months.
No, absolutely. In fact, what I suggest is to start with ng Redux, simply because it's a wrapper around Redux. So you have Redux, that is a standard library. ng Rex, it's a different implementation of the same paradigm. But Redux comes from React. So the flow-based architecture of React not inspired Redux. So there are different flavors of the same thing. The first easy step, get confident. If you want to try something else, that's a good way to this action event-based architecture staying in the Angular world. If you want to get out, you can go to React or to plain JavaScript, and Redux can work with plain JavaScript.
The follow-up to this is, I guess the one criticism I read about Redux is scalability when you have a huge store. Because this is just an example. It's small.
Yes, I work. We have a production ready app in that use Redux. Or it's more complex because it's handling assignment, it's handling activities that the student can launch, but it's not extremely big. Let's say that there are 20, 25 properties. It's performing very well. So yeah, this problem of scalability. But if you start to have an application state that it's huge, your app has to be split in different apps. So rather than being where are the bottleneck, where is the limit, perspective, when you reach this limit, it means that you have to start to rethink a little bit your application.
How do you make the decision between like when the app is online, loading the cache service worker content versus like the content the server returns to you?
So the question is how you make the decision between loading cache or online assets. Well, the decision it's made internally in the service worker. If you take a look to the code, we go. If I can find it again, service worker JS. So every time that I do a request, I check. So it depends. There are two approaches. You can have a network approach with a fallback on cache, or vice versa. You can load before in the cache and then go on the network. However, to go first online and then on cache, simply every time that there is a request, you store the result of this request into the cache, and then the clone of this request. If there is an error, it means that you are offline. In this case, you return the response. So the logic is simply here, and in this specific example, you say whatever.
The other case where like you have you try to go, you load from the cache first, and then you have to react to the network. So it's the response.
Yeah. You actually have two possibilities here. That your response is something or not. So you simply handle the return statement with an OR. And if you want, if this object is not undefined, otherwise you get what is online. So you are talking about now cache with a fallback on network. So you search for the cache, and if there is nothing in the cache, you go online. Because here you create another promise, you use the fetch API, you get the request, you clone it, and then if the network response exists, you return the network response. Otherwise, you return the response.
How in this scenario does the cache get refreshed? If there's like an update in the code and like.
So the question is a scenario when the cache is refreshed. Is when you deploy a new version of your app, then the cache potentially have to be invalidated, the old version, and you have to store things in a new version of your cache. You do exactly as you do for a bundle that otherwise can be cached into the cache. You append your bundle and you specify a version number to your cache file just to keep things a little bit more organized, and every time that you update this file, you change the version number and you keep consistency between the.
But even if you if the data just changes, like you're not necessarily changing the format of the data or whatever. Would it just be a matter of like if you want to flip the order of that, would you just set a timer and then cancel, like you did the fetch before you check the cache? Would you set like a timer and then cancel?
Absolutely. The service worker, once it's starting, it stays in idle phase or whatever phase. It's in execution, so you can handle a timer and you can do whatever logic you want inside this timer. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but I have another follow-up question.
But okay, yeah, let's go ahead.
So the case where the new version of the app is loaded, right? Do you just refresh the base to load the new version, or like you have that code take effect?
That you refresh. Let's do it live. Set up cache version 1. Okay. Now should be compiling. Well, okay. In the cache, on reload, we have a version 1. Any request, so there is only the static cache, but you see there is the new cache is created with appended version.
Yeah. So you are importing some dev tools thing somewhere?
Sure. Yeah.
What is that? Is that production version or is that something else?
No. Well, the question is about how to import the developer tools, these ones. If you do this also in production, obviously no. You remove the import, but you can conditionally remove the import without changing behind your code. If we open the app component TypeScript, there is this devtool.enhancer that activate developer tools that you saw in action. Here, and you use the environment variable system of Angular 2 that can tell you if you are on production or not. You can conditionally enable or not. Does it answer your question?
Yep.
Cool.
Just last question, guys, because we have to start wrapping up.
Okay.
Between your service worker code and Angular 2 bootstrapping?
No, no dependencies.
Just separate.
No dependencies between service worker and Angular 2. Cool.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.